I think we should move on to our next series we're going to be talking about here. One that I think is probably going to become one of my new favorite series, I'll be perfectly honest.
Oh.
Known as My Brother's Husband.
Yes, My Brother's Husband, Gengaro Tagame, who's very well known for his Bara manga, which depict, like, some pretty, a lot of heavy, hairy men having some pretty rough sex. And so this is a pretty,
I was talking about good bondage. I'm going to throw out here. Gengaro Tagame. Good bondage. Not featured in this series.
Yes, this is a big deviation from his usual fare. This is more of a slice-of-life family drama story that takes a very, like, adept look into, like, prejudices against, like, gay people in Japan and, like, misconceptions, like, some people can have about them. And then also just about the story about, like, this family kind of just coming together and, like, you know, a dad gets to has his mind kind of changed about, like, certain things thanks to the influence of his daughter, and also just starting to interact with, you know, his brother's husband, Mike, who comes to Japan to mourn, you know, his husband's and the main character's, Daichi's, brother's passing. And it's just a really open and, like, kind of frank discussion about misconceptions, like, people can have about gay people, and, like, how unfounded a lot of the assumptions are, and also how hard it is to, like, fight prejudices, but how also, in the innocent eyes of a child, like, they don't really think about or see these things, and they, like, accept it as normal, and, like, the hopeful, optimistic message of, like, acceptance that can come in the future thanks to that.
Yeah, if there's something that this series does well, aside from a lot of things, really, that I would have to point out, it's that this series does a very good job of really, of showing the differences between how adults and children see things, and those are some of the those are some of the best scenes, I think, in the entire series so far.
Right, because Daichi has this, like, there's often scenes in the book where Daichi will, like, envision, like, something, a particular reaction that he expects Kana to have, but, like, in reality, Kana will have, like, the complete opposite reaction. When, like, Kana asks, men can marry other men? And, like, Daichi thinks, like, oh, she's gonna respond, like, oh, that's weird, but, like, oh, why can't they marry men in Japan if they can marry overseas? So, you know, like, Kana is, like, really, like, accepting and, like, open to the idea of, like, gay relationships, whereas Daichi has all these, like, misgivings and misconceptions about it that get continually challenged the more he gets to realize that Mike is just, like, another human being. And the love he had for his brother is, like, no different from, like, the love any other person, like, straight or otherwise, would experience for another person.
Yeah, I'm looking at the page right now, and Daichi just assumes that Kana thinks, oh, men marrying each other is weird because, oh, well, men marrying each other, isn't that weird? But, like, Kana thinks it's weird because, oh, well, it's weird that it's okay overseas, but not here.
Yeah.
Like, what's up with that?
And another great scene is, like, when Kana asks Mike, like, who was the husband and who was the wife in, like, Mike and Daichi's, Ryoji's relationship, and, like, Mike just, you know, very simply explains to her that, like, they were both husbands because, like, a husband is a man, and Ryoji and him were both men, so, you know, they were both each other's husband, and Kana gets it just immediately. Like, it just makes sense to him. And Ryoji was like...
Basically explaining the logic puzzle that doesn't need to be a logic puzzle.
Yeah, and because Daichi, you know, himself was, like, assuming the same thing. He, when Kana asked the question, he, like, spit out his dinner and, like, was thinking, Kana, watch your mind, because he thought that was, like, a rude thing to ask. But, like, when he thinks about it, like, he realizes, you know, he thinks about, like, why he, like, just made the assumption about that and why that would be, like, uncomfortable subject of discussion. And it's because, like, he was like, pigeonholing, like, gay relationships and what couples and marriages are as something that's naturally between men and women, and that, like, in a homosexual relationship, like, one of the partners would have to take up, like, the role of the opposite sex, but that's just not the case. And like during this moment, like Daichi his eyes are kind of opened that like he doesn't really know like anything. Like there's no one's playing like another role. Like they're just themselves. They're just people, and like they're equal partners in their relationship.
Yeah, I was actually kind of surprised at how early on in like I guess about the halfway point, because it's 4 volumes long altogether. I was kind of surprised with how much of a turnaround Daichi as a character has in terms of his views on gay marriage and whatnot, and how I was pleasantly surprised at the kind of turnaround he had by the end of what would essentially be volume 2, because these are being released in 2-in-1s. Which by the way, I'm actually legit upset that I don't know when the next volume of this is coming out, because I do want to read the rest of this so bad.
I spent an hour trying to find out. Like I needed to know.
But I could kind of understand why, because I think like we were just talking on the show a couple episodes ago about how this series has just ended in Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So I wouldn't be surprised if the 4th volume isn't even out in Japan yet.
Well, and this is the thing, but the 4th volume is the final volume, as I understand it. So like we're only getting one more volume because of this format.
Yeah.
Which like I'm fine with a wait, knowing that means I'll have a complete series that easily.
Oh yeah, yeah. But after I read the first volume of this, I need more. Like I want to see where this goes. It's just it's good.
I really appreciate everything it does. Like I was talking earlier about how nice it was that Lesbian Deal with Loneliness was able to not necessarily be a series completely about sexuality, and this is kind of like that, but it does revolve around Mike and his sexuality, because it's taking the no stupid question approach to this sort of story. I feel like this is Tagame reaching out to a wider audience than would normally read his work and go and say, I want you to understand me and what it's like being a person like me, by giving you not necessarily the absolute answers, but his answers as to how human anyone is regardless of sexuality, but specifically he and gay people in general, and gay men in particular, can be, despite any sort of preconceptions that may be laid at their feet by a particularly judgmental Japanese society.
Right.
I think what's important about this series is that, yeah, it deals with sexuality, but like, I think it's important that this series is told from the perspective of Yaichi, who is heterosexual, who is a straight Japanese man. Like, I think having the story being kind of told from mostly his perspective, I think is an important thing. And I think it is an important facet to making the story just that much more universal.
I wonder about that, because I feel like Yaichi is also taking a hard look at his own sexuality too throughout the book. And like, realizing maybe there's something he's been repressing about himself. So, maybe there's more behind like him and his sexuality. I got that feeling
about that.
I got that feeling reading the book that, there may be something. He may have been repressing like a part of his sexual identity because like he had these preconceived, and misunderstandings about what it meant to be gay. But at the same time, like the series like makes a point to show that that these people, like gay people, like all people, aren't defined by their sexuality. Like that's not all that there is to them, that they're people, and there's like all of us are human beings, and we experience the same thing, and like the love between two men has the same emotional underpinnings as love between a man and a woman, and two women. So I think that's like what is really great about the story, is that it really like shows that it really shows that these aren't like a strange, like distant thing. These are just like people who are living like normal everyday lives.
It genuinely means a lot to me as a bisexual person, just to see that this is trying to have such a well-intentioned message and reach out to people and just be like, hey, we're people. Like that feels extraordinarily rare, especially in a particular comics industry where the stuff that comes over to English is
fetishistic.
The worst. Yes, fetishistic. I mean, particularly yaoi. Like, it's nice to see a series that doesn't go straight to purely effeminate characters interacting, falling in love, and discovering they have a magical hole that isn't quite like an anus and isn't positioned right.
Yeah.
And look, the yaoi hole's a real problem. My lesbian ordeal aloneness actually mentioned that in passing, and Jesus. So, like, it's nice. I'm not saying that Barra stuff's necessarily a solution, but it's a diversity. It's a diversity of identity that I feel was drastically missing from English language manga.
Mm-hmm.
And, oh god, there's so much stuff I could say about this as well. Like, just on the adaptation level, I want to give a big shout out to how this handles Mike as a native English speaker, because he's Canadian. Like, every time an English term comes up where there isn't a convenient Japanese alternative, it will be sounded out in a sort of a phonetic Canadian, so that, like, it's clear that he's saying it in his own language as opposed to in translated Japanese. Like, when we come to the husband and wife role conversation, he goes, no, we're both husbando. And it's like, yeah, that's, because obviously it's a completely different reading experience to how it would have been in the original Japanese. And I feel like Pantheon have handled that so well that I honestly kept stopping every time it happened in the story just to admire how good an adaptation this is.
Yes.
I really enjoyed the nuances in the translation myself as well.
Oh, also, Yaichi being a father is kind of great. Because, I mean, we're saying how a lot of this is about his perceptions and how it's perceived through the eyes of a child, which is, it's really important. You know, children of the future, the way they perceive these relationships is key. But it's how being a father tempers him saying what would have been quite impulsive and harmful things that are based on his preconceptions, because he often will only say them in private or in his own imagination, because he's aware, like, just instinctively as a parent, as an adult human, that the things he says in front of his daughter will affect how she thinks about stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, I think it doesn't even need to be explicitly said in the story. It's communicated very well through the visuals and through this storytelling device of him indulging in his assumptions on how a conversation will go, or his internal thoughts, and then the reality not matching up to it.
Right. Like, especially, like, later on in the book, where, like, one of Kana's friends, you know, her parents tell her that they don't want her to hang out with their daughter because they think Kana's going to be a bad influence because they've learned, you know, about Mike. And, like, Yaichi is thinking about, like, how, you know, devastating it would be, like, if Kana got the idea that, like, Mike is, like, somehow a bad person or is, like, somehow undesirable just because other people, like, are projecting, like, their misconceptions about him. And it's like, you know, that's just a, you know, very powerful scene about, like, how important it is for, like, children to kind of grow up in, like, a very accepting environment, and also the challenges there are in, like, in a society that just doesn't, like, accept gay people, like, broadly, like, especially in Japanese society, but even in, you know, American society, we still have people like that, you know, who think ill of gay people, and, you know, that can be hard on, like, children, especially children who have, like, homosexual relatives, to, like, you know, come to terms with the fact that there are people out there who, like, hate one of their loved ones just because of their sexual identity.
I feel like Tagami actually does really well to point a finger of a lot of Japan's prejudices towards this stuff, at how reserved they can be about things. There's a small running thread about hugs I feel like is emblematic of the larger problem at Japan's societal core towards any level of affection, let alone what may be perceived as unconventional by them as something like a gay relationship. Like, because this is a society where a hug between a daughter and her father is unusual enough that even in a private setting, Yaichi is hesitant to even consider it and actually does not do it. Like, Japan's repression is brought up a few times in this series, and I think that's not a bad place to look at the difference that's there and what the story's doing.
Yeah, actually, just kind of speaking of that, I think from the very first, like, 2 pages, double page spread, whatever you want to call it, the level of, like, intelligence in the series really, like, struck me, because the first, like, 2 pages of the series are just this what you could tell was colored, but is grayscaled, obviously, for the physical release, because color costs money, and it's just a nice double page spread of Mike and Yaichi and Kana on a ship, and the first chapter of the series is called the Black Ships Arrive, which, I'm no Japanese history major, but even I kind of caught on to that. It's the first double page spread and chapter title alone are an allusion to really significant changes in Japanese culture, where
arrival of Commodore Perry.
Yeah, where basically Japan eventually started opening up to trade with the West, kind
of forcibly, and it's sort of kind of the case here. Like Mike, actually kind of like unwillingly accepts Mike into his home. But then,
where Yaichi is forced to deal with change.
I mean, ironically, because of the politeness of Japanese society, like, he can't say, "Oh, don't be here." Like, he kind of has to accept because the circumstance feels forced upon him.
Yeah, I mean, we see that like duality in, like, his character, and, like, in the sequences where, like, he's thinking one thing, but then, like, he actually says another thing. And usually the thing he's thinking is, like, a lot more aggressive and assertive, and then the thing he actually says is a little more, attempts to be a little more polite. There's that interesting, contrast in, like, what Yaichi actually thinks and, like, what he actually, like, says. And then that also contrasts later on, of course, with the scenes with Kana and, like, his assumptions of what Kana will say and what she actually says.
And I mean, and you get to see how much he opens himself up to the possibility of, like, her being able to say anything, because he has the dream sequence where she marries a woman.
Yeah, that's how this volume ends, and I'm interested to see where it's going to go from in the next volume.
I feel like how he processes that is going to dictate, like, a good chunk of the next story. But I really like that, because it's almost like his subconscious is coming around, because he's considering the possibility of the person he cares about the most having this sort of lifestyle and how he would deal with that. Oh, another thing, this is massively tangential, I'm sorry, but I find it interesting as well. Like, Yaichi is clearly flawed. I mean, he has the prejudices, but they lay down a lot of hints. He is divorced because he used to be abusive in marriage. Like, which is intimated rather than outright said, but that it's clearly what they're intimating.
It's pretty heavily implied.
And I feel like that's really interesting, because it's showing that an ordinary relationship can be torn apart not just by grief, which was Mike's assumption, and both, I was saying this on Twitter, both Mike and me got to feel like complete idiots when Yaichi's ex-wife turned out to be alive.
Yeah, that kind of caught me off guard too, because I really...
Which was great.
I really just assumed that the wife was dead.
I guess I was genre savvy enough to call the fake out.
You were smarter than either of us, yeah. But, like, I think it's just interesting because it shows both straight and queer relationships can be perfectly normal and flawed. Like, I feel like that's an important angle that's being taken there. And it's not that there's love lost between the two characters. I'm pretty sure they go off to go and have sex off panel at one point. So, there's clearly some sort of love there. But it shows there are complications and difficulties.
Mm-hmm.
I think probably my favorite part of the entire volume is when the older brother of one of Kana's friends is seen kind of sneaking around Yaichi's household, and when he finally catches him, it turns out that this kid just wants to talk to Mike and basically come out to him.
Yeah.
I thought that was probably my favorite part of the entire volume. Like, I wanted to cry. That really struck me.
Yeah, that was a really sweet moment.
I found that really interesting. Not everyone gets that opportunity, and for even a fictional character to get it there, and for it to be treated so sincerely and respectfully, and like it took the step back so you wouldn't risk awkward dialogue over it, as any writer can fall into regardless of sexuality, and instead just gave it room to breathe as a mostly silent scene.
It's
really
told visually, which is great too.
And it's told so well visually, so well. And like it's weird, like I've never had to deal with the scenario of coming out myself. I basically just decided one day that I was just gonna just casually drop it into conversation every now and then, and people would just kind of be like, oh yeah, no, we probably thought that you were bi, and I was like, yeah, that it was always been pretty obvious as far as I've been as a human being. But I feel like there is this ridiculous value here of being able to come out to someone who is out and have their support that so many people in any society do not get to have. And I feel like there's a release and a huge sense of relief getting to see it shown on the pages in this comic.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's it sends a great message to, young kids who are trying to come out. And like, it also speaks to the importance of like having there to be someone who's like, you can talk to about this and talk to who understands like what you're going through and like how meaningful and important it is to have that someone.
Just someone to show you that you're normal, really.
Yeah, and you see when the kid is talking and Mike, and like you see like just this wave of relief coming about him, and then he bursts out into tears, and it's just like Mike, puts a hand on his shoulder as he's crying. It's like just being, it's just the experience.
It's powerful stuff.
Yeah.
This comic actually does tearful scenes really well as well in general. Like I feel like it doesn't come up enough in the series, but it's been a very short amount of time since Mike's husband and Yoichi's brother like actually passed away, and grief isn't really part of the series. Like it was either 1 month or 2 months. I'm afraid without picking up my phone, I can't check. But like. It takes until quite far into the volume, and for Mike to be drunk, for there to really be any display of grief for both him and Yoichi, and it's strong and very subtly done on Yoichi's part. They show the moon as seen through watery eyes.
Yeah, I was confused about that for a second. That took me a little bit to realize what was going on there.
Which I feel like is how it should be, because you don't expect him to cry either because of how he's been through the whole series. And so like just having to think about what's happening there, I think made it better.
Yeah, I would agree, actually. I just took it as one of those things where it's like, because Yaichi's been shown to be sort of stoic and not really want to freely express himself as much as the other people around him are.
I mean, they literally introduced him at the start of the series, like the very, very start of the series, as the one who doesn't emotionally react.
Yeah, he didn't cry at his parents' funeral.
Yeah, like that's their lead-off point, is to be like, oh, he's the one that doesn't cry.
I mean, he's kind of emotionally stunted in a way. He doesn't know how to express like his real feelings and express his grief,
which might play into other things. Like again, they intimate his abuse in his previous marriage. And you think, like, how much is that also related to the fact that he's just not an emotionally open person? Like, what is there that he couldn't deal with at the time that led to that? There's so much to unpack about this comic. Like, guys, I'm wide-eyed right now. Like, it is... Like, before we went into this, it was my favourite comic of the year. Now we've actually talked about it for a bit, it might just be one of my favourite comics, full stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, this honestly... I mean, I want to say depending on how it ends, because I obviously haven't finished it yet. But I want to read the second half of this as soon as I can. But for formality's sake, I should say, depending on how it ends, this could actually become like this will probably go in my superficial like top 10 favorite manga of all time. Honestly, like this is becoming one of my favorite comics of all time. To be perfectly honest, like I'm really I'm just kind of shocked at how well really deals with its subject matter.
Yeah, I'm at you there that I'm going to have to reorganize my favorites list because, between this and Lesbian Experience, oh boy, this is.
Oh, I kept saying ordeal. Sorry, this whole episode I keep saying ordeal instead of experience, which totally changes the meaning of that title. Oh. Again, I'm going to throw this out here. Kids, if you read your comics on your phone because it's more convenient than having them on your shelves, that does mean you're going to get the names of stuff wrong a lot. Because phones mess with microphones, so I've not been able to check anything while talking.
But yeah, this is just a good series, and I think I would put this in the same category as A Silent Voice, where I feel like this is a series that everybody should read.
Yeah, I would say this about both My Brother's Husband and My Lesbian Experiences, that I really wish these were books that got into the hands of a lot of people that don't even read manga, got into some school libraries, because these teach some really important life lessons that are especially going to be really valuable for young people who are confused about these things, and it just has such great messages that I think these are the kind of stories that anyone can read and empathize with, and it can really open a lot of minds as well.
I feel like these are the sort of books that have the potential to be in schools, I mean, you look at other books that have become such integral parts of comics history for the sort of stories they tell. And again, My Brother's Husband could somehow release the second book and it's terrible, but that feels unlikely for some reason, almost like this first book was so good. But I feel like there's teachable lessons and analysis you can do on these that put them not quite on the same level as books like Mouse and Barefoot Gen, where the historical context I feel like keeps them a little bit above. But these are definitely the sort of essential graphic novels that should be on a pedestal forever, that transcends the comic medium, if you want to go and be a hoity-toity academic who looks down on things,
I definitely think the social messages espoused in these books are on par with the, historical, insights books like Mouse and Barefoot Gen give. I definitely think they're equally valuable, and, and they should be widely distributed and, get into the hands of a lot of people, and these books have been getting a lot of praise from people outside of the manga field. You look at the back of My Brother's Husband, Volume 1, the pull quotes are from, are comments from Alison Bechdel, author of Fun Home, and renowned comics artist. You also got Anderson Cooper of CNN, who,
That one floored me. As far as an interesting get, outside of comics, I feel like that's a really good one.
And they even got an actual kid to give a quote, or at least I assume this is an actual kid.
Either a kid or someone with a very weird fetish, judging by the pull quote.
Yeah.
Just because they're oh yeah, this is really good, and I'm a kid, so I should know. Yeah. I'm just oh god, I hope they're a kid. Oh god, but yeah, in fact, now that Alison Bechdel's been mentioned, there's another thing. This should be out there as much as Dykes to Watch Out For or Fun Home.
Yeah.
They're that good.
But I think that's about it. Really, if you take anything away from this podcast, you should really read both works. I think it's safe to say that we highly recommend both of these works, and that everybody should go read them.
Mm-hmm.
I really wish that this comics environment we have now, where I feel like these manga are being embraced, I really wish this existed when Fantagraphics started releasing Wandering Sun.
Yes.
Because that might have made it past 8 volumes. I know there were other factors, but that strikes me as a book that should be featured on the same level as these two, as huge things, and sadly is just only had half the series released.
That's tragic. I thought those were weren't there 2-in-1s? I thought they were pretty big books.
I don't know if they were 2-in-1s, but they definitely did not finish the series, citing low sales, an uninterested wider audience, and whisper it, Scanlations.
Oh, my God.
Did not help them finish releasing it, which I'm not using this as a moment to take a platform on that, because you'll do you. Like, I talk about this stuff enough on Twitter. But God, do I wish that they finished releasing Wandering Sun.
Gosh dang it. Darn it, Scanlations. Darn. Man. Yeah. But for what is out, you should definitely check out that series as well. Very important.
Yeah, let's just be happy that I think we live in a better time in terms of, I think, the manga and just comics industry in general.
Oh, definitely.
That this stuff is able to be widely released.
Which means that I can get back to my activities of the last couple of years, which is trying to get my favorite LGBT manga book licensed and released in the US, because God knows I have pestered a good few publishers trying to sell them on the virtues of Boku no Hentai, and one day they'll release it. And a market that's accepting books like this, it might be interested in an amazing 10-volume series about gender identity.
Yeah, we definitely need more comics like this that tackle these subjects out here in the West.
I just wanted an opportunity there. That was just my clever little way of just trying to sneak in a plug for another LGBT book that people should read. So I'm clever like that. Oh dear.
Huh. But I think unless we have anything else to say, I think that might do it for the episode.
I think so. This was a great discussion. We're all super passionate about these books, in case you couldn't tell. And yeah, obviously we highly recommend them. These are two of the best books of the year.
Isn't it just really nice to talk about books that we all feel positively about? I feel like it's just a real good time.
Yes.
I'm the worst at comics negativity. As much as I crapped all over Cross Account earlier, comics that you can just love without reservation are such a good time. And I mean, that's part of why these books are books that people should be reading, is they're good, 100% good books.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm beside myself. It feels so rare that there's comics where you just don't really have much in a way of negative stuff to say, or at least where the passion and the joy you have for the book overrides everything else. So these books are special.
Definitely.
Oh yes.
This podcast is special, guys. we had a happy time. It's a special podcast.
Yeah.
I'm trying to find the most saccharine ending here. Perhaps the real My Brother's Husbands were the friends we made along the way.